Gary Suganuma, for being a guest speaker. A little bit about Gary. He is an attorney with extensive experience in litigation, government law, and regulatory compliance. He's earned his JD from the University of Pacific McGeorge Law School of Law in 1997. He also owns a BBA for marketing from the University of Hawaii Manoa. Excuse me, I think I'm coming up with something too. Mr. Suganuma has built a distinguished career in public service. He has been the director of Hawaii Department of Taxation since December 2022, and prior to that, he served as a deputy attorney general in the Department of the Attorney General's Education Division from 2011 to 2017, and has supervised the deputy. Oh, sorry, and has been supervising Deputy Attorney General in the Attorney General's Tax and Charities Division from 2017 to 2022. Prior to his career in public service, Mr. Suganuma was an attorney in private practice where he handled civil litigation cases involving personal injury, commercial litigation, product defects, contract disputes, and design and construction issues. Mr. Suganuma was admitted to his practice of law in Hawaii courts in 1997, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2004, and in the U.S. Supreme Court in 2007. So, quite an impressive list of accolades from our director speaking today. So, with that, let me turn it over to Gary to share his information.
Hey, great. Thanks everyone for having us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to share information about. Today we'll be talking about the historic tax cuts that the legislature passed last year. Before I get into that, just to give you an idea of the Department of Taxation. So, as David had mentioned, I've been here for a couple of years, a little bit more than 2 years. So tax administration is something new. Most of my career was spent practicing law. Just to give you an idea, our department has offices statewide. So we have offices on the Big Island, both in Kona and Hilo. We also have offices on Maui, Kauai, and we even have an office on Molokai. We have about 320 or 330 employees statewide. Just to give you an idea of the volume that we do, in fiscal year 2024, just our office, or our department rather, collected approximately $10.25 billion in state taxes. We processed more than 3 million returns, processed 2.3 million electronic payments. Our offices statewide handled 270,000 plus telephone calls and 51,000 face-to-face interactions with taxpayers. We also processed permits, licenses, and registrations related to tax. We did 41,000 of those last year and processed more than 20,000 tax clearance applications. So let me jump into the presentation today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you folks see it?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So what we're here to talk about today, as I told you, is the historic recent tax cuts by virtue of the passage of Act 46 last legislative session. Okay, so really, to put it into context, really what we're talking about is not just Act 46, but some of you might be familiar with the passage of Act 163 in 2023. So Act 163 involved making 3 refundable income tax credits more generous. So child dependent care tax credit, earned income tax credit, and also the food excise tax credit. So that was done in 2023. Last year, with Act 46, what the legislature did was they passed a law that increased the standard deduction and widened the income tax brackets for specific years beginning after December 31, 2023. So basically, starting in 2024. And I'll get into more detail about that. Um, what I'd like to highlight is Act 163, we sometimes refer to as GAP 1. So GAP, GAP, stands for Green Affordability Plan. So when Governor Green came on board as the governor, one of his initiatives was to address the high cost of living for working families in the state of Hawaii. And so he came up with this plan, the Green Affordability Plan, which included targeted tax relief to our lowest income earners in the way of tax credits and general tax relief, such as increasing the standard deduction, widening the tax brackets. Initially, personal exemption was being looked at to make that more favorable as well. And so all of that was actually in a bill in 2023, which part of the governor's administration package. It was House Bill 1049 back in 2023. So that one was an omnibus tax bill that included both targeted and general relief, everything we just talked about. Unfortunately, that bill didn't make it all the way to the finish line. But what happened was House Bill 954 then became the vehicle. So some of the tax credits in House Bill 1049, which was Governor Green's bill, actually got put into House Bill 954, and that eventually passed as Act 163. And then uh, last session, the administration bill actually made it to the finish line, HB 2404, and that is what we refer to as GAP 2. So GAP 1, credits, GAP 2, general relief, standard deduction, widening the tax brackets. So I'll be using those terms GAP 1 and GAP 2 throughout the presentation. So going to our first slide here. What this slide shows is the 3 reasons behind the historic tax cuts. First of all, a fiscal surplus. So, at the time the state had money. They're looking at a fiscal surplus. What do we do with the surplus? With the surplus, the legislators could have chose to do several different things, right? They could put the money in a rainy day fund. They could pay down unfunded liabilities, such as pension liabilities coming up, or they could have refunded money back to taxpayers. You might recall in 2022 we had what is referred to as a constitutional refund, where families were getting either $100 or $300 per dependent, depending on your income level. And so I think the legislators are trying to figure out what to do with the surplus. Do we give back credits to everybody? Do we put it in a rainy day fund or whatnot? The other thing is that the lawmakers, just like the governor, recognize the high cost of living for working families in the state of Hawaii. And what they wanted to do was help working families. So sometimes they're referred to as ALICE families. And if you're not familiar with the term ALICE, it's an acronym. I believe it's a United Way acronym, and it stands for asset limited, income constrained, and employed individuals. So what we're really talking about is ALICE families are working families that just don't make a lot of money. They struggle with the high cost of living here in Hawaii, and they struggle to afford basic needs such as food, housing, healthcare, childcare, and transportation. And then the last or third reason behind the historic tax cuts to us is a need to update our tax code. Our tax code had not been updated since the early 2000s. Our income tax code, is one of the, I believe it might be the only tax code in the nation that is not indexed to inflation. So what that means is that the tax brackets are not adjusted over time. And so over time, what happens is you get what we call bracket creep. And so what really that is, you're earning, you have a wage. People typically get small raises every year to compensate for inflation. And so over time, and especially during COVID, right? During COVID, inflation increased 20%. And so if your pay went up 20% to compensate for inflation during that period, because the tax brackets aren't being adjusted, you're just being pushed into higher and higher brackets. And so your effective tax rate just keeps climbing. So essentially, it's basically having your income tax raised, not intentionally, but by virtue of you being pushed into higher and higher brackets. So I think so well, okay, let me move on to the next slide. So this is getting back to GAP 1 again. So this is again, GAP 1 is the income tax credits targeted relief, and these are the credits we're talking about. The details are not important for today's discussion, I don't think, but here it is. Basically provided or at a cost of $104 million. And that's money that working families were receiving in the way of refundable credits. So as you can see from this graph here, that targeted relief, so the yellow is the EITC, and then the gray is the food excise tax credit. Those are two of the credits that were within Act 163 or GAP 1. And as you can see, it really helped the lowest earners, right? The two lowest deciles here gained the most. Those credits were targeted to those income levels. But what you can see in the middle, which is the Alice households, it didn't really assist with the Alice households at all because these are families, again, that are not making a lot of money, but they're making too much to qualify for the EITC or food excise tax credit. Um, and one thing I'd like to point out is you might look at this box and say, well, these guys are not making, just a little money. Some of these, it goes up to like $150,000 is what we're looking at. But when you think about it, if you have a family of four and your household income is 150,000, that could be two school teachers. And their combined income of 150,000 might sound like a lot, but when you really factor in the high cost of living here, could that family afford a home to buy a home? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it'd be really close. It'd be really tough. Um, so after Act 163 or GAP 1 passed, it didn't really help with this is where Hawaii fell as compared to 41 other states and the District of Columbia in terms of income tax liability. So you see here on this graph, Hawaii is the second highest. Oregon is the highest, Hawaii is the second highest. So the tax credits really didn't do much to help most of the people in the state in terms of the high income tax liability here. Okay, so now we're switching gears. So now we're talking about GAP 2. So this is a law that passed last year, Act 46. So what I'd like to point out is what this does is it increases the standard deduction in kind of like even, the way I look at it is even numbered years. So 2024, 2026, and 2028, and 2030, and 2031. And then the tax brackets are adjusted in odd numbered years, starting in 2025, 27, and 29. And this will give you some details about how much the standard deduction is going to increase over time. And I'll have a little bit more detail about that further on. So here's a good graph that shows you how much the standard deduction is going to increase. So on the left side, on the vertical plane, previous law, so 2023, that was what the standard deduction was for married and single filers, 4,400 and 2,200 respectively. Now go all the way up to the top, and by 2031, the standard deduction for married filing jointly goes all the way from 4,400 to 2,400, and standard deduction for single or married filing separately goes from 2,200 to $1,200. This next visual shows you current versus 2029. So how the brackets shift. So the way I look at it is, if you look at the orange line, so at 8.25%, that rate before now, so up to 2024, 8.25% kicked in at $48,000 of income. And these are for individual filings. Then compare that to the gray line, which is in 2029, the 8.25% income tax rate is not going to kick in until individual income of 275,000. So it's a substantial change. This one I'm not going to go over. I'm going to spare you that. The next slide, this will give you a good idea of how GAP 2 decreases the tax burden on medium income households. So what we're looking at here is a median income household. We pick $97,000 of income for the household. And then it'll show you over the period covered by GAP 2 from 2023 all the way to 2031. It basically shows you how much your tax liability is going to get reduced. So under the existing law, for the household earning 97,000, about $5,800 worth of income tax liability. Fast forward to 2031, it drops down to just below $2,000 of income tax liability. So what this visual shows is, remember after GAP 1, the targeted credits, we were still second highest as compared to the 41 other states that have an income tax and District of Columbia. So after GAP 2, by 2031, you look to the right side of your screen, and that's where Hawaii is going to fall. This assumes that none of the other states make any overhauls to their income tax brackets or income tax laws, rather. We will be, what is that, third from the bottom? So it's a dramatic shift as compared to the other states. So this next slide will show you where we ranked before, and then after GAP 1 and after GAP 2, where we rank. So low number is bad. Low number means that we're close to the top. So if we're number 1, then we're the highest taxing state. And if we are 41, we would be the lowest. So again, we only choose 41 states because I believe 8 or 9, I think 8 other states don't have any income tax at all. So we're just comparing ourselves with those with income tax. So what's relevant, I think, to you guys for business owners is if we look down, just say married filing jointly. So, as you know, most of the businesses here in Hawaii are pass-through entities. And so there's, sole proprietorships, partnerships, LLCs, S corps. And so business, reports its income on the individual income tax returns of its owners, right? So a married couple, business owner, if they're have 150 or $200,000 worth of income, before any tax relief, we were taxing either second or third highest in the nation. And that was true after GAP 1. But then look what happens after GAP 2. For $150,000 worth of income, ranked 29 now out of 41. And then for 200,000 would be ranked 23rd out of 41 states. So there's a dramatic, I guess, betterment there as well. So the next slide talks about tax progressivity. So you may have heard of people talking or discussing whether or not the recent changes are progressive. So with a progressive tax, what you have is higher income earners pay a larger percent of their income in taxes. Regressive is the opposite, right? Lower income people pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes. So an example of a regressive tax is our general excise tax, right? The general excise tax is the same rate no matter how much money you earn. So you go to Long's Drugs and you buy something that costs $10, you pay 4.5% tax plus county surcharge, whether you make 10,000 a year or if you make $1 million a year. So a higher percentage of your income is paid on general excise tax if you earn lower than somebody that earns higher. So what GAP 2 does, the general tax relief, which is increase of the standard deduction and adjustment of the tax brackets, it is a progressive tax structural change. We already had a progressive tax. This will show you the progressivity in the changes made. So after GAP 2, for example, if you're making $41,523, I guess between $21,000 and $41,000, this is how much your tax liability is going to be reduced by 2031, 132.8%. So, and that's not a mistake. It's actually over 100% because those same taxpayers would be also entitled to refundable tax credits. And so it takes them over 100% improvement. And then you look to the right side. So income earners over 208,000, their tax liability only gets reduced by 19.1%. So it's a lot. So the percentage wise, it's a lot. So that meets the definition of a progressive tax. I think what you will hear is people talking about the recent tax changes as helping the wealthy because a wealthy person in dollars will receive a lot more benefit than lower earners. But really, that's not how you measure progressivity. So, higher earners will, of course, in absolute dollar amounts, receive a larger benefit only because they just pay a heck more a lot of taxes. So again, you can't look at the absolute dollar amount of taxes paid by each individual taxpayer when you're judging whether something is progressive or not. So I think this slide is interesting because what it shows is that GAP 2, remember GAP 1 really benefited the lowest income earners. GAP 2 here, what this shows is a change in take-home pay or take-home income by across various income levels. And so what you see here is most of the benefit is really going to that ALICE population. So again, GAP 1 targeted to the lowest earners, GAP 2 structural changes to our income tax system helping the ALICE families. Okay, so what we have here is just a comparison between the effective tax rates in 2019 versus 2031. And again, so we're looking at, so the effective tax rate is basically just the average rate you're being taxed on your income. And so I think what is important to note here is, again, if you're looking at the Alice population, um, that basically shows the most improvement in terms of um, the effective tax rate. The effective tax rate goes down the most for low-income earners up through the Alice population. This one shows the cost. So because of GAP 2, we are collecting less income tax. This is how it affects the general fund, basically. So all of these numbers are compared to fiscal year 2024. So for fiscal year 25, which is the first year that the tax brackets are adjusted, it's gonna result in 240 million less dollars going to the general fund. That's money that income taxpayers will get to hold and they don't pay to the system. 2026, 500, almost 600 million dollars less than in 2024, and so forth. When you get all the way to 2032, we're looking at uh, almost $1.5 billion less than um, when compared to 2024. So it was a substantial amount of money. But again, this is money that the legislators would have had to figure out what to do with, right? Because this is surplus money. I mean, they could spend it on other things. What they did was they chose to spend it on and give it back to the taxpayers. So not really give it back, but let them hold more of their earnings. So when will people start feeling the effects of GAP 2? So GAP 2 started with the increase in the standard deduction in 2024. And so people should start seeing possibly bigger refunds when they're filing their taxes right now for tax year 2024. In 2025, that's when the income tax bracket, the first income tax bracket takes place. And so as business owners, I'm sure most of you know that we did update our wage withholding tables. And so if you have employees, uh, the amount to be withheld from their paychecks should be less. And so your employees should be seeing a little bit increase in their take-home pay, a little bit larger paychecks. And again, it's going to be increases in standard deduction and bracket changes, alternating every other year, and it goes all the way through 2031. So what we anticipate is we'll have to update our wage withholding tables probably, yeah, I mean, for sure, annually. So at the end of this year, we will update it for next year, all the way up until 2031. And so the key takeaways, largest tax reduction in the history of the state, GAP 2 was. Um, the tax law in effect for 8 years. Um, it will make a meaningful increase in take-home pay impact for taxpayers, especially for working class families. So the Alice population. We talked about Act 46 or GAP 2 being progressive. Um, it, I guess the last point is that this is a new approach to Hawaii fiscal governance. And so this goes back to what the legislature could have done with the surplus. Um, and this time, instead of giving it as, for example, constitutional refund to everybody, collecting the money and then giving it back, what they're doing is they decided to just let people hold that money and keep that money instead of paying it in taxes. And so I think I'm at the end, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, David.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was a very detailed slide, and there was quite a bit of numbers and percentages that were shared with us. I do have a question in the chat. So is it okay, Gary, if we just go to all the questions from our members?
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Okay.
promise that I can answer them all, but
Okay,
if
let's
yeah.
yeah, let's just go for it. So Jennifer asks, do you suggest employees submit a new W-4?
I think I guess it would just depend, right? I mean, everyone, I guess everyone's situation is different. So in terms of adjusting withholdings and doing those kinds of things, um, I think the way that we updated the withholding table was sort of conservative. So it was designed to um, allow less withholdings on an ongoing basis, but still withhold enough that people should be getting larger refunds as well. So yeah, sorry. I mean,
Does that answer your question, Jennifer? Okay, sort of kind of
Yes,
well.
sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
that helps. Thank you.
Okay, great, great. Any more questions? Please either unmute and speak up, or raise your hand, or type it into the chat. I know this was a lot of information for those of you to process. Okay, here now, maybe I'll ask. I have a few questions. So Gary, because the withholding is less and the state is accumulating over like the next 6 or 7 years, over $1 billion of negative tax revenue, where if if the state is not collecting that revenue, you won't have to give it they won't have to give it back, is what you said. So um, is there a problem, or is there an issue with not having that forecasted negative revenue, that revenue that's supposed to be coming in? Is there a problem for the state? Should there be any other need? Like,
um,
are they going to change the tax laws midstream just because they ended up falling short because of other things might have come up in their forecast, is what I'm asking.
I guess anything is possible. Really, that issue is a budget and finance issue. Yeah. So um, at the time this was passed, you know, budget and finance based on forecast by the council and revenues. Um, they were expecting a certain amount of growth to the economy, and with that, they figured out how much extra money they might have. And so now it's just a balancing act of balancing the budget, right? I mean, if the forecast comes in, um, I guess lower, then budget and finance or the legislature will have to figure out ways to spend less, possibly,
Mhm. Okay.
or look for other revenue generators. Yeah. So there are some bills going through this session, among others, increasing cigarette tax, increasing TAT. I think I
Hmm.
saw one increasing the GET. But similarly, there's also other bills, you know, on the table still to reduce taxes even further. So it's kind of a balancing act. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Hillary's got a question in the chat. Do we have, so they have a mainland payroll company that they use. Um, do they now just direct them to the state site to verify, what they're withholding, if they're withholding correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We have information about the new withholding requirements on our website. And if you still need assistance, you can always contact the department as well. Yeah.
And I also put in the chat a link to our booklet A, which is the employer's tax guide. They can reference that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any more questions for Gary? I'm going through. I don't see any hands raised. I don't see anything in the chat. Okay. Well, I think that's it. Oh wait, sorry. We just got another one in from Amor Gentry. Thanks, Amor. Is there a way someone can figure out estimated state tax liability if they currently deduct additional amounts on their paycheck to avoid paying at the end?
Yeah, I don't know that we have like a calculator. I don't believe we have a calculator on our site now, but through the governor's office, there is going to be a microsite called, is it Tax Cut Hawaii, Gary?
Yes.
That one will probably have some kind of calculator like that. That microsite is not up yet. We're working with a contractor to get it up in place, and so we're hoping within the next month or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Then somebody asked, where can they get a copy of the slide?
I don't. I mean, we have the slides. This was prepared by our tax research and planning office. Let me see if this is something that they're okay with us sharing and disseminating.
Okay.
But you do have
Okay.
the recording of the video too.
Yeah,
and-
that too.
Yeah, right. So yeah, in the recording, you went over every slide, so there may be
Yeah,
some details that they
it's
can
all there.
refer back to. Right. Right. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, staff. Let's see if there's any other questions coming through our members or attendees. Let me go through the attendee list. Okay, no, I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody else. Uh,
Can I just quickly
sure.
a hiring event that we're going to be at in Hilo. So hopefully you can see this. So this is this Saturday, if anybody's interested. It's going to be at Prince Kuhio Plaza. We will be there. It's actually put on by our Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, but we're hiring. So if you know of anybody that's looking for a job, especially in tax, our Hilo office will be there for any questions. But also, let me stop sharing here. And also, I did put the LinkedIn link to our LinkedIn page. So once that Tax Cut Hawaii microsite is up, I will post a LinkedIn post to letting you know it's available. It will have a calculator to help people figure out, what their savings will be or what their savings will be. So, but we also post other information. For example, I posted the hiring event. I posted other hiring events, and I said earlier, I'm not sure if everybody was on, but we post our tax announcements and information releases.
Okay.
So be sure to
Okay,
follow.
great. No, that's great, Gary. All of this, the extra tools that tax calculator thing will be great for us to fiddle with to figure out, what is the best tax bracket to file. Is there any other questions from our attendees?
Okay, and don't forget about our tax workshops in the fall. So if you follow LinkedIn, we'll let you know. We not only get tax practitioners, but we get companies that send their fiscal or their bookkeeping people to learn about the tax law changes and everything else that they need to be aware of.
I'm sure all like the tax accountants gotta be like keyed up on all these new tax changes, right? Because if you take your personal or business receipts and pro formas and your financials to them for them to file, they should be keyed up on all of these new tax changes, right?
Yeah,
I
so
guess for those of you who file your own, then this is very helpful as well. Just to understand.
so the subject so we normally do it in the fall. And so by then we know what tax law changes came about from the current session. And so, I think it's helpful to a lot of tax practitioners so that they're aware of tax law changes that are coming down. We, like Gary said, though, you don't have to be like a tax preparer in order to benefit from this. So anyone interested, yeah, I mean, please